Dan Lapel for New Focus Recordings, and I'm joined by composer and colleague Douglas Boyce, whose newest record of chamber music, The Hunt by Night, is coming out tomorrow, March 5th. And is tomorrow March 5th? Wow,
March 5th.
this year is flying by / lasting decades.
Yes,
Uh,
it's glacial and meteoric somehow.
Thanks for joining us, Douglas. And you're joining us from Boone, North Carolina, right?
From Boone, North Carolina, up on the Blue Ridge,
Great.
which is an interesting place to spend a pandemic.
Yeah, I can
Put
imagine.
it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Isolation. The isolation part is very simple.
Nice. Yeah, well, that's helpful. And this is your second release with New Focus, the first being Some Consequences of Incapacities. And, well, I don't know. Let's, I think before we forget, because I often do this, let's shout out some key people who had a big hand in this, besides for yourself.
I think we'll talk about pretty much all of the players as we go through.
Sure.
But of course, there's these wonderful performers from Counterduction, pianist Diego Jacopo Vucciute, who is just wonderful, fabulous young cellist named Skylar Slack. People from the Trio Cavatina, really wonderful collection of players and players that I really have loved work with, and in many cases have worked with for a very long time. And I think that's something that we can come back to when we talk about the record as a whole. It's a very special record to me because of those people.
Yeah.
And in the same way, mostly recorded at Octaven Audio with Ryan Strieber.
Yeah.
Which is just I describe it to many people as my favorite place on the planet.
Yeah, and Ryan knows your music so well that it really shows in the care that.
Yeah.
So, well, let's dive in and talk about three of these pieces that are on the record. Maybe let's start with Quintet La Marmee. And this is sort of brings up a question that I feel like is a fairly common thread throughout a lot of your work, which is an engagement with older music and with older themes. And I'm curious, I have some idea from listening to the piece, but I'd love to hear from you the ways in which you grapple with older thematic material. What's the process there?
Well, Quintet La Marmee is actually one where I think the process of composition actually sort of renders invisible or inaudible a lot of the origin points. In some of my other music, it's very much on the surface. There's a couple of duo pieces that have they're in many ways just kind of reworking of our subtilior music. And in Quintet La Marmee, which is one of the first ones, it's the first piece that I can think of that sort of has something in the title that sort of marks its historicality, that sort of frames the entire the entire experience of listening to it sort of in your historical ears pricked up, and it's one in which this theme, which was the basis of so many masses for so many for multiple centuries, it was absolutely the origin point. But at the same time, by the time I had thought about the material and worked the material, it's it's difficult to pick out. While at the same time, it's in some ways one of my more stricter appropriations of historical practices. Many parts of the piece are pretty strict isorhythmic structures.
Mhm.
Um, and at the moment that I wrote it, I think I was, this is one of, I would think of sort of the, in addition to being one of the first real sort of counter induction pieces, right? One of these pieces that were written for the group for the instrumentation of what was in our basic instrumentation. But it's also a point of me coming to the ends of my study and saying, okay, what is this? What is this voice? What is this sound that I'm after? And even though in some ways I feel like I could have lost the La Marmee part of the title, for me those studies, those years of study, um, uh, were sort of pervade in the piece. They're there in I was always asking the question of what is the next thing to do to this thematic material? How does it knit together? But at the same time, seeing that sometimes that those gaps in technical processes historically are so vast that sometimes it kind of can't be overcome, or the process of translation kind of loses it. Now, I do think there are moments in the piece where the character has a sort of ancient character to it. But if you start running around for the pitches, it can be it is craftily hidden away. I
Yeah.
do remember though bumping into I was at I was given a guest lecture or something, and an old teacher of mine was in the medievalist was in the room, and someone sort of challenged me on that. I was like, well, man, but I can't. I know the Lumar. We all know the Lumar tune. In that room, everybody knew the Lumar tune, and they said, but I can't really hear it. It doesn't make any sense. And Jenny Bloxham sort of stood up in defense and gave this litany of all of these medieval and Renaissance pieces where the origin point is effaced by the process itself of composing.
Yeah.
And so while this piece did make me think a lot about historicality, it also made me, I think it was the start of a much more mature thinking of what is the process by which one goes about claiming to be composing, to be the claimant to some kind of creativity.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily assume that if there's a famous theme in a title that it's going to be sort of immediately discernible. I think just the idea that it was a jumping off point,
yeah,
is sort of enough. I mean, you might find yourself listening for it for sure, but
yeah,
I feel like I've encountered so many pieces where it references either the Folia theme or
yeah,
Lumar or whatever, and then you listen, you're like, okay, uh, this isn't necessarily meant to be like Where's Waldo type of music.
right, right, right.
Should
Yes,
we listen to a little bit of
I
it?
think we should jump into it.
Get a sense?
It's a nice little moment that captures some of the sort of intensity of the opening, which is
Yeah.
really
And so this
quite
is
something.
performed by Counterinduction, which of course is the group you co-founded, and uh, it's Caleb Vanderswag on cello, Ben Finglin on clarinet, Miranda Cookson on violin, Jessica Meyer on viola, and Ning Yu on piano. Correct?
Yep.
Beautiful. So should we tie that into the record as a whole and sort of move on to another piece to discuss?
Yeah, I think that the quintet is it exhibits a lot of features of my music. There's a fair amount of aleatory. There are there's I think a tension between pretty severe sort of intense passages and then uh, restful, almost meditative regions. And so it sort of exhibits a lot of those a bunch of different features in my music. But I think the big thing and the one that is a reason we decided to put it on first on the album um, uh, it's I think a great example of why I love writing chamber music, why I love listening to chamber music, why I love thinking about chamber music. Really, kind of beyond any other music that I've participated in, that I've listened to. And there's um, a strangely public intimacy to the performance of this kind of music. You're there in the trenches with these people trying to put this thing together and watching it unfold and then collapse and then emerge again and collapse in different ways. And in La Marmee, and then again in this second piece that we're going to listen to, which is from a set of etudes that I'm continuing to work on. This one for cello and piano. Sort of the aleatoric passages, the sort of Lutoslawskian designed chants passages, um, are there in no small part to sort of perturb the easy, regimented interaction of performers that can happen in notated music. And whenever I'm sort of being my professor self and talking about this, I talk about how I'm really interested in aleatory, not because of aleatory. I'm interested in open pulse because there's then can be a moment where the pulse reasserts itself, the shared pulse reasserts itself, and meter comes into existence. But then at any moment further down the line, it can fall apart again. And that's very much present in Quintet La Marmee. It's very much the operative feature in the stretto. In some ways, the stretto of the title, Stretto Perpetuo, is that tension of we're compressing, we're expanding, we're shrinking, but we're also just sort of shifting in and out of connection, not to some extent in phase, but more sort of like how is this agreement? How do we come again to an agreement about where the beat is, where the bar is, where these things? And so it's for me, the wonderful thing about chamber music, and what I always try to bring out in my music, is that perpetual challenge of how can human beings connect when they're doing these things, especially when, like this piece and a lot of La Marmee, it's really quite challenging. It's really quite challenging technically. In some ways, it's there to be challenging technically so that it places even more pressure on this question of togetherness, of sort of
Mhm.
unity.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
true. When something is that demanding, there's no choice but to engage fully. You know,
yeah,
you
exactly.
you don't stand a chance if you're sort of as a performer going at it, with any halfway or anything.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, should we? You want to take a listen to an excerpt of this to sort of put some sounds to words?
I think that's a great idea.
Why don't you introduce this one in terms of performance?
So this is Stretto Perpetuo. It's from the fourth choir of the Book of Etudes project, like I was saying. And some of them are solo pieces, and some of them are trio pieces, some of them are duo pieces, all combinations of piano, clarinet, and cello. And so this is from the subset of piano and cello. etudes that are in there. It's performed by pianist Eva Jakubovic, who actually has just started this year on the faculty at Duke. Um, Wonderful pianist from Lithuania, who I've known. Oh, good lord, that's depressing. Who I've known 20 years. And Skylar Slack, who's now with the Richmond Symphony, wonderful cellist, who I've not known for nearly that long, 4 years, 5 years, something like that. But a wonderful player and a wonderful soul.
Great.
And so this sort of actually was one of the things that brought them together to play together. So there's again, outside of the piece, there is this sort of chamber music as this great coming together of individuals into collections.
Beautiful. Let's take a listen. Beautiful. Do you
Thanks.
want to give a little bit of context for this painting on the cover and
And immediately behind you.
immediately behind me, of course, and sort of some of the conceptual background of the album as a whole?
Well,
A lot of nice, meaty stuff in there that's of interest, I think.
yeah, and I think that the painting, which is sometimes called the Hunt by Night, sometimes called the Hunt in the Forest, um, is a 15th century painting by Paolo Uccello, um, and it struck me for a couple of reasons, which we'll talk about. I'll present in some ways, but what it does, which made me feel like both naming a piece after it, and then after I named the piece after it, naming a whole record after it. Um, it is, and you can see it elsewhere. You can see bits of it behind Dan right now. It is quite literally an image of a hunt being undertaken, uh, and it in the full visual, it's this extremely wide painting, and like on the booklet in the CD, it sort of wraps around the entire thing, and that's still only maybe 70% of the painting. It's There's a tremendous visual life to it, and it's this wonderful mixture of uh, energy and motion and violence about to happen as these horses and these dogs and these running men are going into this forest in search of the stag, in search of deer, and you see a few of them within, but it's at the same time it feels very ordered, and the trees of the forest are sort of this grid that you're perceiving. It's also, in the relatively uh, early days of the sort of not the earliest days, but of perspective in the visual arts. And so in some ways, there's this tremendous depth of view as you track the trees into the forest and you see the figures getting smaller within the forest. But at the same time, some of it seems very quite flat, like a much older visual styles for these. And so um, I had written a piece that was very much about it felt like a gotcha. It was a chase. It was the sort of players pursuing one another. And that's actually the last piece on this CD. Um, and so I first came to it because of that, and but it also struck me as not just of that particular chase of that piece, but something of the narrative of everything I just said about chamber music. There's this strange pursuit which is highly ordered, but also fragmented, and also could come apart at the seams at any moment. And so there's a visual energy to it, and then this was quite literally by chance. I've been looking through it's in the Bodleian, the paintings in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and I was sort of like, oh, they have lots of paintings, maybe they have something. I'm sort of thinking about things. And then I searched a little bit more about the piece, and it had also been discussed in a poem by Derek Mahon, in, incredible Irish poet who had just passed in October. And in his, I call it in the program, it's an ekphrasis, sort of, because it's not just talking about the poem, it's talking about other things through talking about the poem. He talks about how it also has this childlike character, this playfulness to it, which was quite striking because I had previously written a piece referencing, I wouldn't necessarily say based on, a different poem by Derek Mahon, which was very much interested in childhood and relationships of fathers to offspring. And so at that point, I was like, okay, apparently this is supposed to be the name of this piece because it connects to this other piece I wrote, and that just sort of came upon it in a wonderful way. Um, and then, as I thought about it, I was like, well, that's if I'm going to make any great claims about this being a disc of chamber music, that's the painting for it. But this is maybe not the most elegant, but a transition maybe thinking about a third piece we might look at today, which is Sale's Knife Bright in a Seasonal Wind, which is a piece that I had sketched out, I had done some other, it sort of grew into the name, and the piece grew and changed quite a bit over time. And another thing that happened in that time span between my first sketches of the piece and the piece finishing was I had a child. I had a little boy, and it's a poem. It's from Akil. I won't read the whole thing. It's quite long, but I will just say that it is a poem about being a parent and being sort of near your family, but then also being away from your family to some extent because of the nature of what you do. And maybe I'll just read the first stanza. Akil by Derek Mahon. I'll skip over the Irish because I'll just destroy the pronunciation. I lie and imagine a first light gleam in the bay after one more night of erosion and nearer the grave. Then stand and gaze from the window at break of day as the shearwater skims the ridge of an incoming wave. And I think of my son, a dolphin in the Aegean, a sprite among sails knife bright in a seasonal wind, and wish he were here where currachs walk on the ocean to ease with his talk the solitude locked in my mind. And the whole poem continues in other themes, but it made me think a lot about this strange, one of the strange things about being a composer of chamber music and not a performer of chamber music, or at least not a performer that anyone should be, no one should pay me to play anything. There's a loneliness, there's an isolation, there's a stepping back, and to some extent in the day-to-day life there's a sort of stepping back because you're working and thinking about this thing that will happen and will be collective, but at the moment of writing is alone, is solo. And so just this poet sort of writing about his children made me think about my little boy, and as I put in the program notes, he has a guitar that he. I'm sorry, Danny, he's not yet really begun to study properly, but he loves making noise with. Uh, but more than anything, he loves to dance. He's always in movement and energy and flow. Um, and so I think that the piece in a 4 year old kind of way, um, has these turns of like a lot of energy and then an almost, you know, manic obsession with some little thing, and then it just turns and does something else, and then sometimes just relaxes for a long period of time. And that's something like what it is to be. I'm sitting right here at my desk, and now, especially with the isolation, I sort of look out over there into the other room where he's old enough that he's doing his homework and he's doing his reading and he's doing. But it's funny because it's tremendously close, and yet there's this gap. There's this distance, which again, to pick up on the great theme, I think that's one of the things that is so beautiful about just the notion of chamber music, that with the right people and the right people present and listening and engaged with, something quite distinct happens in that connection that I find very different from many other, I don't think all, but many other modes of music making, uh, where somehow this distance and this incredibly elaborate music that's happening and often on the sacred elevated stage, somehow there's something about that process that's going on there that is connective. It's connected from the players to the players, and it's connected from the audience um, to the
Great. Well,
performers.
let's take a listen to some this piece, "Sales Knife," right in a seasonal wind.
I should say, so this features Jeff Irving, fabulous percussionist,
Mhm.
Miranda Cookson, the extraordinary Miranda Cookson. I don't know sort
Mhm.
of what else to say about Miranda, and some guitar player. I
Right.
can't I can't quite remember
And,
who it is. This is sort of a trailer from a full sort of cinematic uh, performance of it. So it's a little bit out of order, but it gives something, I think, of the sense of that coming together and that working on things together.
yeah. Great. Okay, here it is. Great. Well, it's really fun to revisit that piece, but also that session, which was a really enjoyable session. And cool. This was a really nice, little taste of uh, some of the music on the album and some great background for people who are interested. And I'd just say, check out the album. It's a really wonderful collection of pieces. Hunt by Night, Douglas Boyce. It's on our website and all the other places you can find music. And it comes out tomorrow, March 5th. March 5th or
Awesome.
March 4th? I keep on. Time
It's,
means nothing to me right now.
it's the fifth. Don't worry.
Okay.
It's,
Yeah, yeah. So today,
that's the historicity thing. That's right. You know, just
today's the day that
it's all it's
get
all centuries at the same time, right? So,
Trump was supposed to get re-inaugurated today. So I don't know if it happened. I didn't check the news. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us, and thanks so much, Douglas, for taking the time to talk about this record. And
and thank you, Dan, for
oh, my pleasure.
running that little label that you weren't run, because it's a wonderful service to the community
Well,
in
it's
the
our
best
pleasure.
possible way.
Okay, everybody, we'll sign off and see you